Well, that was an amazing experience, just an incredible journey. And for those of you that like history, or those of you who are really interested in film or where it came from, you totally learned something new and something different. And I think that's really great and important. I'm Bart Weiss, and we have our Q&A with David Wilkinson, who spent so much of the last 10 years, 30 years, right, making this film and sort of searching for this. And also with us, we have Gordon Smith, a Dallas filmmaker, a film enthusiast, person who has more VHS tapes than God. Gordon, well, I'll give you the first question. Why don't you start us off?
All right, thanks for having me along, Bart. Want to introduce David Wilkinson, documentary producer, actor formerly and still does apparently, film historian, film detective. I love that concept, and I love this film. It's a bit of espionage, history, science all together. So, David, tell us how you first heard about the Garden Party film and what inspired you to want to pursue it further.
It was one of those things we were told at school, and Yorkshire is the largest county in the UK, and it's very proud and it's very different from the rest of the UK, and it's almost like a country in itself. And so when I was told at school that in the 1960s that film was invented in Leeds, none of us believed it, because we thought it was just one of those myths, because everything that's great in the world has come out from Yorkshire, and everything that's rubbish has come from the rest of the world. So there's that sort of mentality. And it wasn't till a few years later, when I was in that library that's in the film, that I began to, quite by accident, do some research, and that I found that it was true. And for many years, when I would go to Hollywood or to the Cannes Film Festival or somewhere, people would say to me, where do you come from? And I would say, well, I come from where Leeds, where film was invented, which I later found out it wasn't invented there, but that's by the by. And they'd say, well, you don't sound American, or you don't sound French. And I would say, no, it wasn't there. It was in Leeds in Yorkshire. And most people, particularly if they were British, just laughed. And so it became this quest for me to prove the facts. And I couldn't raise the money for a very long time because nobody believed it. I went to all the broadcasters here. I went to broadcasters in America. And people just thought it was some kind of urban myth and that it wasn't true at all. And this was all, so most of the time I was looking and searching. There was no internet. So you would have to go to a library and look into an encyclopedia. And most encyclopedias didn't have them. So once the internet became much more readily available, then lots of these stories would leak out. Then people would put things on Wikipedia. Most of it to begin with was incorrect, but over time it was changed, and the true facts were put on there.
So, David, where did you, and I think you mentioned the film that you had trouble getting funding for this, everybody turned you down, but this film got made. So somehow, some way, you got some money to make this. How did that change happen that you were able to do this?
It came in many ways. One was my parents' old house. My parents had died, and their old house was divided between the 4 children, and my part of that house went into the film. And there was an ex-Lord Mayor of Leeds, and he really believed in the story. And he said, I'll put up the money. And there was an initiative the government had set up, the UK government, to encourage new business. And anybody who invested in a new business would get a 50% tax rebate straight away. And if that business failed, it was called SEIS, and it could be no more than £150,000. And if it failed, then the government paid you the 50% that you'd lost. So for an investor, it was a win-win situation. And even then, I didn't raise all the money that way. And I got the money also from a man called Sir Robert Worcester, who's an American, who's one of the very few Americans that's ever been knighted by the Queen. And he gave me the money because he was intrigued. So it was luck, really. Because they knew that if it all went wrong, they wouldn't lose any of their money. It's since been stopped for films because it got abused. So that made it happen. But that's often the case, is that something out of left field comes along and you can make it work.
So I'll ask this one, and then Gordon, you can take the next one. Throughout the film, we see you, and you do have experience as an actor as well as a director and producer, walking around, and it serves this sort of metaphor of the journey, the learning, and your sense of traveling the world and seeing so much. And you have this backpack on you, and there's just something very charming about this, the backpack and you walking. What's in that backpack?
The backpack is incredibly important to it, because a lot of the time in the film, it was just two of us, particularly in America, or occasionally there were three. Very rarely there were more than three. And it's just, in the backpack is my computer to transfer the rushes, 2 hard drives, the release forms for buildings and people who are in the film, my schedule, the money I need to buy the crew's lunch, anything like that. It's all the very practical things that, and there's nobody else can take it. The sound guy's got all his equipment, and we're in streets where if you leave it down, somebody's going to pinch it. And the cameraman's got the camera, so there is only me that can carry all of this. So it just became something that I've had in all the 3 films, and it's the same practical reason, because I still don't have the budgets I would like. And the journey is as simply, I am doing a journey. I specifically chose to not know a certain amount of the film. I kept it back because I wanted to learn on camera. So 42 of the scenes are 1 take only. So when I'm being told that information, I'm being told it for the first time. And that was a difficult juggling act, because as a producer, you should know everything there is about what's going to happen in the film. But as a director and presenter, I didn't want to know that. So I wanted to learn, because I thought it would be better for the audience to do that. And ultimately, this documentary, like most documentaries, is talking head. And I thought I distributed, because I'm also a distributor. So I've distributed many documentaries, and it's just 15 people in different rooms talking. You know, it could be on the radio or a podcast. And so I wanted a mechanism to make it visually interesting without having the budget. So the journey just seemed an obvious thing for me.
And having that 1 take just gives it a different level of authenticity. It's like every reaction is a real reaction. What you see in your eyes is truly what you're feeling. But as the producer, it's like sometimes you wish you could have a second take, or it wasn't what you want. I mean, you are at the moment, very same moment, thinking of the producing elements, the directing elements, and the performing elements at the same time. And all 3 things have to be present as you're discovering things and telling things to an audience, which is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's a very difficult juggling act. And I made mistakes where I would sometimes think as the producer, and I should have thought as the director, and vice versa.
Yeah, Gordon, go for it.
Okay. Well, first I want to say I read David's bio on IMDb and discovered he is exactly 6 months to the day older than I am. So I feel a very kindred spirit with him. And well, looks like we have a question from the audience. Has the filmmaker contacted Martin Scorsese and his World Cinema Project, especially considering the Civil War panorama connection? What about UNESCO?
Martin Scorsese was going to be in it. And while we were making the film, he's the only filmmaker in 30 years I'd ever come across that had made, that knew about The Prince. And as we were filming in Leeds, one of the historians in the film sent me a link to the New York Review of Books. and he mentions Le Prince in it. So I got in touch with his people and liaised with a woman called Lisa Frechette, who was his assistant. And the idea was, when I was in America, I was also going to film him, but he couldn't make it. And so I went back to the UK, and then they said, he'll do it next month. And then he got busy and he said, oh, the month after. And then 4 or 5 months had gone by, and they said, look, he's doing this film Silence, and he can't do anything for at least a year. Can you wait? And I said, I'm sorry, I can't. And so I got Mark Rance to stand in for what was going to be Martin Scorsese. Although Martin Scorsese would have done different things, but I did want him to talk about, you know, his knowledge, which is encyclopedic.
Well, Mark Rance probably speaks a lot slower than Martin Scorsese does, so maybe it would have been easier to understand. Anyway.
Yeah, but I'd have got much more in.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But Mark Rance does a really great job. His knowledge is really good. And the other thing that's interesting about Mark is that he has a real good knowledge and history, you know, having lived in the United States for a long time, but also has a British perspective as well. And he's one of the few people that can speak to both sides of that knowledge.
Yes, I needed an American because to analyze that affidavit that the first film could have been made in New York. I felt if I had somebody who was British, it would have seemed to be a bit too biased. So I you know, and I didn't lead Mark in any way. I wanted his, you know, true opinion on it.
So David, why is it important to know who was first? I mean, the film discusses it at some point, but from your point of view, why first? Why does that have a significance?
Oh, it's a terrible answer, really, but it's the truth. Is that I would never have made this film if I'd not been born in Leeds. And so it's a sort of chauvinistic, nationalistic, whatever kind of, I just wanted to show others what we knew and nobody else believed. But having said that, most people in Leeds didn't know the story. So it was just about proving the case. And I was very worried. This is why I didn't learn as much as I should have done, because my worry always, I was going to find out that it wasn't the case. And if I'm being really honest, I think he did shoot something in New York. I have no idea what it was. It doesn't exist. But he lived in New York for the last 5 years of his life. And he would have continued experimenting. That was the man.
We have time for one question, Gordon, and you get it. And we have supposedly 30 seconds. So make it quick.
Our previous question was from Leslie, by the way. So I did see the garden party film, which was incorrectly on YouTube called a video on YouTube earlier. And you said something about how it wound up on YouTube earlier this year.
Yes, I hadn't seen it for a long time. YouTube made it available to everyone because it is technically owned by the Science Museum in London, and they wouldn't let anybody see it. So I think a member of the Science Museum that was so angry about this got a copy and put it on YouTube before anybody could do anything about it. So that now makes it available for the world. But before then, nobody could see it.
Well, maybe people should do a contest of who can do the best recreation of that. And that could be a YouTube meme for the world.
Yes.
About imitating the earliest of cinema. Well, David, thank you so much for making this film and to set the record straight and to letting the world know that, yes, good things happen from Leeds, which I think was the real thing behind the film. But your dogged persistence in this is not only like valuable for the film, but something that all of us can sort of look at and say, you know, that's really important. And it helps us in the passions that we're doing to go forward. So thank you. Thank you for making this. And I'm sorry it took us 5 years to find your film, but we did. And we're happy, so happy to have shown it.
Thank you very much for showing it. I'm delighted.